Hello, welcome to globaletraining.com. In this short video, we will look at parts of a computer. Well, here, parts of a computer, a monitor, system unit, that's a box that kind of sits next to your desk or next to your monitor, and we'll talk about that in next few minutes. Then we have keyboard and mouse, so we very well know what we use it for. Those are input devices to the computer. Then you have speakers, so you play the music and you hear the sound out of the speakers. Printer, yes, you're right, printer is not part of a computer, but printer is used to print documents. I kind of listed it there because from a layman's perspective, and they think that computer should be able to print, so that's the reason I listed there, but definitely it is not part of the computer. Next is CD-ROM drive or DVD drive. These are the drives where you can put a CD in to read the data off the disk or to play some music. Now let's try to understand what a computer does. Does a computer do things by itself? Things like that. Now, when it comes to computers, you're asking it to do something. Say, for example, if you want to play music, you're actually asking the computer to play the music. You want to watch a movie, you're specifically saying, play this movie for me. So you're actually asking the system to do something for you. Primarily, you're performing a task, and that task could be watching a movie or playing some music, or it could also be going to your website, or it could be saying some data. So what happens to all this? When you do things, they all get displayed on the monitor. So it's the job of the computer to accept your instructions, and if they are valid, execute it and do the work and display it on the screen for you, or play something off of if it's a music, then you hear some music from your speakers. So primarily it does some work for you. So when someone says computer, what do you imagine? You imagine a screen, a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse. Of course, there are no speakers in the screen there. I mean to say on the slide. And then you see a little box, sitting right next to your monitor. So this is what I was talking about. Parts of the computer. So this is how the hardware looks. So primarily, let me go pick a color here. Let me use this color. Okay, so this, as we know, is okay, I'm not able to write. Hang on. Okay, so this is your system unit, and when it's the back side of the system unit, this is how it looks. Now, what is inside this box? All these. One you see here, this is called motherboard. This is the processor. This is the memory or RAM. This is some CD-ROM drive or DVD drive. So you put the CD in here. This is the hard disk. This is your sound card. This is your network card. What are we missing here? We are definitely missing some card here. Oh, that's nothing but display card or video card. Okay, I'll just put a picture like that. So inside your computer or your system unit, the way it would be arranged is, everything kind of fits onto this motherboard. So here, what you see here, that's your memory slot. So these memory sticks go into these slots here. Your processor, where you see, Core 2 Duo, Core 2 Extreme Duo, quad core. This goes into the CPU slot here. Then you have these PCI slots or PCI Express slots. These cards go into these slots. These cards, like the network card, sound card, display card, they all go into these slots here. And your hard drive and DVD-ROM, CD-ROM, they all go into, they'll have some sort of spot to kind of physically fit in, and then there would be a cable connecting all these. I mean, literally for memory, there's no cables directly fitted into the slot that is right on the motherboard. But for hard drive, there would be a cable, literally a cable that runs between the hard drive and the motherboard. So primarily, all these are neatly arranged inside this particular box. Of course, you have a power unit as well, because you need power to run the system. And here on the back of the computer, see this thing, that's a power socket. So that's a vent, that's the exhaust fan for the power supply. So when you turn on the power, so that's when all these devices will turn on. Then we'll look into the boot process later, but all I'm trying to get to is that all these parts are inside this particular box or system unit. Now, while all these go in here, then where does this display or the screen, your keyboard, mouse, where do they all go? See, we have other ports on this particular system unit on the back side. So this, with the thing in the red box, that's a display port. So there would be a cable that runs between your monitor and the system unit. Similarly, you have mouse and keyboard connected to the CPU unit, or some advanced monitors actually have some ports right on the monitor where you can connect your keyboard and mouse. Again, that's latest or recent technology development. So, but it's safe to assume that these keyboard and mouse go right behind, go the back side of the computer or in the front, wherever the ports are. And these little small ones, the orange, green, blue little things, these are all the sound card related ports. So that's where you hook up your speakers. Anyway, those are your parts within the computer. Next. Okay, so now let's talk about processor. Now that you have seen various parts inside the system unit, now let's talk about the processor. I mean, what does a processor do? Processor is, you can compare it with a calculator. What does a calculator do? Let's say, for example, you want to add 1 plus 1. You send the input, it does some magic, and what you see is 2. You see it on the screen. Now, similarly, if you do some big number, let's say 20 plus 30, or maybe even bigger, you send the data in, it would do the calculation and display 50 to you. So the calculator is doing all the hard work. It's calculating, it's doing the work. The same way, when it comes to processors, by the way, here you see Intel and AMD. There are two type of processors. I just wanted to use both so that you all know. So we have both Intel and AMD type processors available in the market. So as you have seen, that these processors sit on a motherboard. So anything, literally anything that you want to do on a computer, it has to be executed by the processor. So whatever that is, you're playing a music, opening a document, closing a document, trying to copy something, browsing internet, it doesn't matter. Whatever you do, those instructions or the requests will go to the processor, and the processor will execute them. So if you want to read something from your hard drive, meaning if you're opening a document, closing anything, so processor does the whole work. So basically that's the job of the processor. Okay, well, let's look at type of computers. I mean, you have desktop, as we all know. It has a monitor, a keyboard, a CPU box sitting next to it, a laptop, which, the whole thing is in one. It's a single unit. You have mobile phones, you have tablets, of course you have mainframes, mid-range, supercomputers. These are all different kinds of computers used for different purposes. Say, for example, mainframe, mid-range supercomputers are used in very large organizations for back-end processing. For example, most of the banks use mid-range or mainframe computers in the back-end. Stock exchanges use it. But for us personally, as a tester or as a normal person, you would either buy a desktop or a laptop. And nowadays, people buy tablets, iPad or Samsung tablet. And mobile phones, they're also computers, but primarily they're very small, used for different purpose. So all these are physically different, meaning different sizes. Of course the cost is going to be different, and they're used for different purposes. So those are the types of computers. Okay, powering the computer. So definitely you need power to run your computer. So of course we need power, right? So what really happens when you turn it on? So the general expectation is that you turn on a computer, then it would take a minute or 2 or 3 and display your windows. So people just think that you turn it on, you see windows on your computer. Then where does this BIOS and battery fit in? We'll talk about that. Okay, so now let's look at the boot process. Booting is nothing but powering on your system. So when you turn on a computer, meaning you're supplying power to the computer, what happens is, there is something called BIOS, which is nothing but basic input-output operating system. That gets initialized, and that is actually in the firmware. When I say the firmware, that particular program is actually on the motherboard in a chip. And the main purpose of that is when you boot the computer, what it does is it goes and performs something called POST. POST stands for Power On Self Test. So what it does during this post process or phase is that it will check the hardware. When I say hardware, we all know that we really need a processor, the square shaped thing, the processor we looked at a few slides ago. So it will make sure that CPU is actually found on the system, on the as the hardware. Then it'll also check for memory. It'll check for a hard drive. So what it does is, it'll make sure that you have all the hardware needed to start the computer or to move forward with the boot process. Now, a quick question. Do we really need speakers to start the computer? Really not. I mean, speakers really are just to listen to some music or some sound, but it's really not a required component to boot the computer. You need processor, as we know, because without processors nothing will happen. We need memory because it plays a key role. You need hard drive. That's where the operating system is loaded. If you don't have the hard drive or the operating system, but whether you have an operating system or not, that's another thing. But it will check for hard drive, and it will check for other basic things like the CMOS battery and making sure the other little things are working within the computer. So it's a hardware level, not software level. So after it does all that, it will find the hard drive, and let's say, for example, one of these is missing. The system will just, you might hear some sound, and it'll just not boot. You'll see an error on the screen. Let's assume that it found all the hardware that is needed for booting. So when that is done, then it'll find the hard drive, and within the hard drive it will look at or find the MBR. MBR stands for Master Boot Record, which is the first, which on the very first sector is the first 512 bytes of the hard drive. We'll talk about this in a later video, what these bits, bytes are, megabytes. We'll talk about that later. But for now, let us just assume that there is something called MBR on the hard drive, and this information is loaded. That means the BIOS will have to read the information that's in this particular record, which is MBR, and that MBR will have the information on where the operating system can be found. That means in order to load Windows 7 or Windows 8 or Windows XP, Windows Server 2000, whatever the operating system might be, because it will sit within some partition, and that partition needs to be loaded. Not the whole partition, but the operating system needs to be loaded. So the BIOS, what it does is it'll check for all the hard drive, find the hard drive, so all the hardware, then the hard drive, and then it'll find the master boot record and find which partition is active, and then it'll try to load the operating system from that particular partition. Okay, let me repeat this again real quick. The BIOS, when the system is booted, the BIOS executes the post process, nothing but power on self-test, during which it will check for all the hard drive. If any of the hard drive is missing or not functioning properly that are required for the system to boot, the system will stop system will stop booting the computer. So assuming that everything went well, then the system will look at the hard drive, look at the master boot record on the hard drive, and find the partition that is active, and then go there and load the operating system from that particular partition. But if the operating system itself is not found, then you would see operating system missing message. If not, the system will continue to boot, and you will see the Windows prompt, logo on your screen. So now we talked about operating system. So what is operating system? So that's the result of booting. You boot, then what happens? So you have hard drive, and finally the whole BIOS post happened, and it loaded the operating system. So where does it really fit in the chat or diagram? So you have computer hardware, and we are here. So operating system is actually in the middle. So you interact with the operating system, and the operating system interacts with the hardware. The hardware responds back, operating system takes care of it, and you see that on the screen. So say for example you want to play a music. When you say play music, where does the music file sit? In your hard drive. That is where your music.mp3, let's say, it's sitting. So let's say you try to locate it and you want to play it, you double click on it. So what really happens is when you double click, it starts playing, and you hear the music from your speakers. So the hardware is doing all the job, but the operating system is right in the middle between the hard drive and the human being. So it is the interface between the hard drive and the human being. So that's how the operating system fits into this whole thing. Okay. Okay, so let's now try to understand some basics around memory. So we have some basics on how a processor works, meaning it's very basic. It takes some instructions, it does something, sends output into the hardware. Example, you want to read some data off of the disk, then instructions into the processor sends instructions to the hard drive. It's right in between, it handles the whole thing. So next to the memory, so memory is nothing but RAM, which is random access memory. It's volatile in nature, meaning anything that you access on the system. In other words, let's say you try to open a document, let's say your resume. When you open it, it gets loaded into the, in other words, you see it on the screen. But what really happens before you actually see it on the screen? This is what happens. So your resume is in the hard drive. From the hard drive, you locate the resume, double click on it. What really happens is from hard drive, the resume first goes into your RAM memory, and from here it gets displayed on your screen. So let's say you start editing here. When you edit, you're actually editing the copy in the memory. That's a copy that you're working with. And when you hit the save button, your resume is then saved to the hard drive. Some tools, let's say for example Microsoft, now it automatically saves every few seconds or minutes, but it does automatically save your document. But in the past, it did not have that functionality. So primarily you have to hit the save button. That's when the information is written to the hard drive. So let me repeat it one more time real quick. So when you load a document or anything that you try to access from your hard drive, it could be music file, it could be a movie, it could be any document, Word document, Excel document, anything. When you try to open that, it is first loaded from your hard drive into the memory, and from the memory then it gets displayed on the screen. If it is displaying, it displays, or if it is if it's a music you're hearing from your speakers, then it still has to go to memory and then it is sent to the speakers. In terms of editing, when you're editing a document, you're actually editing the copy of the document that's in the memory. When you hit the save button, that's when it gets saved to the hard drive. So let's say what happens, let's say you open a document, you have written 2 lines and you saved, so it is now in the hard drive. Let's say you typed in line 3, line 4, line 5, and let's say all of a sudden the system crashes, or power is gone and system pretty much stops. Now what really happens, so you have typed in 2 lines, saved, so it went to the hard drive, but you did 3, 4, 5, and now there was a power failure. So technically this file you're working with, all these lines 3, 4 and 5 were in memory and you haven't saved it. So when let's say you power on the computer, whenever you get the power back, or if there was an issue with the power unit within your computer, you fix all that, and when you boot it, what really happens? Your file will only have these 2 lines, because these lines were never saved. They were in the memory at the time, but when the system goes down, anything and everything that's in the memory or RAM is pretty much erased. It's zeroed. So that's very very basics around how RAM works. Okay. Oh, I guess I already covered this particular topic. So primarily, the information comes from the hard drive to the RAM, which is memory, and from there, of course, it gets displayed here, or it can go to speakers if you're listening to some music. So that's what happens, right? That's output. So anything that you try to access, it comes from hard drive and loads into memory. And you maybe, if it's not hard drive, you might be getting it from network, but still it needs to get into the memory, which is RAM. And then, either it gets displayed, if it's the music, it gets played on the, I mean to say, you will, hear it from your speakers. Well, so now that we know all this, parts of computers, let's look at it from a different perspective. So when we originally started, we first said that monitor, keyboard, CPU unit, printer, speakers were all parts of computers. But now that we have at least learned a little bit, now we understand the parts of computers. Now here's the list. We have processor, memory, hard drive, video card, sound card, network card, and other things. Now with this little knowledge, let's try to gauge computers. Meaning let's say you go buy a car, that if you have if the system can drive, or if the car can drive faster, it's going to be expensive, right? Let's say 4 cylinders versus 6-cylinder car, or if it is a manual shift versus auto shift. So that is how you actually compare cars to compare cars, right? So when it comes to computers, so you have processor, you need to know, hey, how fast is my processor? When you say memory, two things: how fast is my memory and how much is my memory. When it comes to hard drive, same thing: how big is the hard drive, how fast it rotates. When I say rotate, it's not the hard drive that rotates, it's the cylinder inside the hard drive that rotates. So when you say video card, what can my video card do in terms of a display? Like, does it have just a regular video port? Does it have a DVI port? Does it have HDMI port to display things? So depending on that, your video card cost will vary. And also say nowadays these cards come with onboard memory, because see here, what you have as a memory is used by the operating system. So even for these to work, they need some memory too. Instead of going here and use this memory, these come with onboard memory. And some also have onboard processors as well. Same way with sound card. Depending on what kind of sound card, depending on its different ports on the system and different memory on the card, the cost of it varies. Network card, same thing. Is it one port, two ports? How fast of a port it is? Is it like a 10 gig card, or a 1 gig card, or 10 Mbps card? It varies. And other things inside, whether you have USB ports, is it 2 or 3, I mean to say 2.0 port or 3.0 ports, and you have parallel ports, you have serial ports, you have SD card ports, so other things that go with it. So primarily, when you look at computers, and when you say, hey, one computer is cheaper than the other, or something is expensive, so it's not just the number, the dollar amount you look at. You need to really look at the hardware specifications. How much speed do you want? How much memory do you want? I mean, with that, you'll make a decision on how much you want to spend. There's no, let's say for example, if you're just using, or trying to buy a computer just for browsing purposes, so you're not going to install any of the softwares like development programs or graphic programs or anything like that. If you're purely using for browsing and occasionally maybe some documents, then you don't need much processing power, you don't need much memory, you don't need big hard drive. So you'll settle down on something that's decent, and within your budget. And depending on your needs, you'll go and buy maybe a better computer. If you're trying to watch movies and listen to music, then you can find the one that best suits your needs.